All right, man. Welcome to the introduction for Crow 777 Radio Podcast. This will be episode 87.5. It's a bit shorter than a normal episode. Jason and I just wanted to get one out for Christmas. It is actually Christmas Day that we recorded this. Jason's going to start out in the first portion that goes out everywhere to YouTube and everywhere else, covering how we kind of got to where we are with Christmas, this kind of materialistic, egocentric holiday that we now celebrate. Where did it come from? What's encoded in it? What are the historical forerunners? Jason is going to take a very abridged look at this to cover things like Saturnalia and other concerns. In the second hour, I am going to jump in and start to really cover the more nature-based, alchemical, and I hate to use that word, but I don't have a different one, but natural concerns, which tie directly to, well, the reason that these ideas were formed initially was partially because it was historically thought that spirituality was connected with the path of the sun. In other words, as the power of the sun grows towards the summer solstice, this is a time for spiritual growth. And in some ways, this still ties to the modern day. After all, so much of the new programming on television comes in the fall. Well, that's when the sun is in supposed free fall in the kind of spinning orbital NASA model, down towards the low point at the winter solstice. All these ideas tied up. The second hour is really quite a thing. It will be available for membership over at Crow 777 Radio. The first part is designed to get people thinking. You know, we all go through these holidays, and very few of the holidays we have in the modern age are not tied, in fact, to the path of the sun. So few of them that are not tied to the path of the sun. The Catholic Church back in the day had much to do with porting over older ideas that were tied in nature into the new ideas that the Catholic Church was putting forward. And even in the first part of this episode, we cover many churches, or at least a couple churches, where you can look them up online and see that inside the church itself, they're depicting the stars, the planets, Saturn, the sun, and this is nothing new. I did accounts here in the state of Rhode Island where I went to St. George's, and there's the zodiac right in the center walkway leading up to the altar in the church. Nothing new here, but most people don't ever consider why or where do these things come from. Anyhow, I hope everyone out there is having a great holiday, however they choose to celebrate it. Let's jump in with Jason. Cheers. All right, man. Welcome to Crow 777 Radio Podcast. This is episode 87.5. This is a special edition that we are recording actually Christmas morning. And it's going to have to do with exactly this time of year. Jason and I are going to address some things about Christmas and, of course, the sun. There are very few holidays in our existence you can point to that don't relate directly to the sun in some way, shape, or form. And there's a reason for this. Anyhow, welcome and happy Saturnalia Christmas solstice day, Jason.
It all comes back to Saturn and the sun, doesn't it? The Christmas, the merry mass of Christ.
Yeah, for this day, it certainly does. So much of it to do with the sun. But of course, as you're going to get into here, you can't march away from Saturn with regard to what we call Christmas in the modern age.
No, we can't. And you ready to start this?
Yeah, I guess we might as well just jump in. If we're fortunate, we'll get it together and I'll get this out quickly. So I'll just kick it straight to you.
A little backstory here. In Greek mythology, Ether or Aether was one of the primordial deities. Aether is the personification of the upper air. He embodies the pure upper air that the gods breathe, as opposed to the normal air breathed by us mere mortals.
So people remember from, the podcast that we've done, the idea of ether, the experiments done by Michelson and Morley, which Einstein dismissed, claiming there was an ether. Here back in mythology, we have references to this very same idea. To refresh some memories, Michelson and Morley did experiments that demonstrated there was, in fact, an ether and claimed there had to be for light waves to propagate through something to reach your eye. Anyhow, back to you, Jason.
Next, we have Uranus, who is the primal Greek god personifying the sky. He is the son of Aether, who had multiple children, and his name in Roman mythology was Caelus. In Greek literature, Uranus, or Father Sky, was the son and husband of Gaia, Mother Earth. According to the Hesiod's Theogony, Uranus was conceived by Gaia alone, but other sources cite Aether as his father. Uranus and Gaia were the parents of the first generation of Titans and the ancestors of most of the Greek gods. One of those, youngest, was Cronus.
So here it comes. Cronus. Drop me a beat, Jason. Put it in 4/4 time. Let's talk about Cronus. Go ahead.
Kronos, or Kronos with a K, was the leader and youngest of the first generation of Titans, the divine descendants of Uranus, the sky, and Gaia, the earth. He overthrew his father and ruled during the mythological Golden Age until he was overthrown by his own son Zeus, imprisoned in Tartarus. Cronus was usually depicted with a harp, a scythe, or a sickle, which was the instrument he used to castrate and depose Uranus, his father. In Athens, on the 12th day of the Attic month of Hekatombeon, a festival called Chronia was held in honor of Cronos to celebrate the harvest, suggesting that as a result of his association with the virtuous Golden Age, Cronos continued to preside as the patron of the harvest. The festival was also celebrated in parts of Ionia, and in these places the month was known as Cronian after the festival. Cronos was identified in classical antiquity with the Roman deity Saturn. The Romans held this god in a much higher regard than the Greeks, and also held a festival in his honor every year that could be said that is still being celebrated today, literally today.
Yeah, right. So as you're describing the initial kind of celebrations that were done around Kronos or Saturn, we're talking about the harvest time here. So probably it roughly translates to the modern calendar. If I had to guess, probably they're a little off. It'd be July and August or something like that. I don't think it makes it into September, but it might. But you're about to push it forward to the adoption of our use of the idea of Saturn or Saturnalia Chronos in the winter months, coming up on the low point of the sun, the winter solstice.
Right. Saturnalia. It was an ancient Roman festival in honor of the god Saturn, held on December 17th of the Julian calendar, and later expanded with festivities through to December 23rd. The holiday was celebrated with a sacrifice at the Temple of Saturn in the Roman Forum and a public banquet, followed by private gift-giving, continual partying, and a carnival atmosphere that overturned Roman social norms. Things such as gambling was permitted, which normally were not, and the masters would provide table service for their slaves. The poet Catullus called it the best of days. It was the Roman equivalent to the earlier Greek holiday of Chronia, as we just discussed. And the interesting thing is, many Christian scholars believe that late summer, early fall would actually be the approximate time of Jesus' birth, as opposed to the late December 25th, which was merely an invention of the later Roman Catholic Church to integrate the pagan beliefs with the Christian beliefs.
All right, man. I like how you thread the needle there at the end without being a dick about it. But there's a couple things here. First of all, the idea of sacrifice at the temple. There are accounts that you can look up that will claim this was a human sacrifice. And you've got to bear in mind, this is when the sun is coming at its low point. The second half of this show, we're going to get into the sun and the winter solstice side of things after we kind of do the relationship here back in mythology that relates to this time of year that we've kind of adopted into our own religious traditions in one way, shape, or form, but they still encode what they encode. The idea of having a sacrifice at this time of year has directly to do with the sun, because it used to be thought of as if this was the rebirth of the sun. In other words, when we came through the summer solstice in June, when the sun's at its high point, the power of the sun is declining all the way down to what is marked now as December 21st, the low point of the sun. There's even claims that the sun does not move for 3 days and then begins to rise again. The whole rebirth idea of the sun. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along, move along. I'm not going to make any religious references, though many people will. So I just wanted to get all that in there, Jason.
And that's the point where you're saying that the sun is in the astrological sign of the Southern Cross, which is where we get the cross, died for 3 days and was reborn, which did not happen in what's now considered the Easter time in the spring, but actually in late December.
Yeah, so many of these things are tough to unravel because the ideas are still encoded in all the holidays we have, but without the key to that encoding, it becomes very confusing for folks. But, it's all there. There's no getting away from it. It's all there. There is scarcely a holiday that came in religious traditions that does not directly relate to some portion of what the sun's doing. But in this case, for whatever reason, Saturnalia was adopted, the ideas of Saturnalia, and then kind of ported over with how we have Christmas now. And I'll point out, in this last bullet point, you were showing how lawlessness was tolerated for some period of time, a few days during the Saturnalia celebration. This has a relationship to Christmas time, because in the ideas of astrology or astrotheology, the winter solstice falls under the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn, the goat, is symbolized by the knees, which we've covered in other episodes, like going to the crossroads, falling down your knees. It's the very same reason here. The idea of Capricorns being encoded, but it represents this time of year from an astrological standpoint, represents materialism and the ego. And so you can relate that directly to how we do Christmas now. It's all about materialism. And if you even go back to the Saturnalia celebration that you're referencing, lawlessness and rape and murder and sex and drunkenness and all these things were literally tolerated, which is in fact echoing the ideas that this is a time of materialism and ego. But anyhow, Jason.
Saturnalia is a festival of light leading to the winter solstice, with the abundant presence of candles symbolizing the quest for knowledge and truth. The renewal of light and the coming of the new year was celebrated in the later Roman Empire at the Dies Natalis Solvis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquerable sun, on December 23rd. Although we are now led to believe that Saturnalia is the holiday in which people during the winter conserved the kindling of Mother Nature by bringing evergreens into their homes. So as you can see, a lot of the symbolism for Christmas is already shown just in this one festival alone.
Right. And I would point out again, almost like so much of the information has been sectioned off into different belief systems. Like if you're a person who studied astrotheology or some form of astrology that's still used in many cultures like Tibet and others around the world, even in China to some degree, although they're still working off a lunar calendar using a true month or trying to use a true month, what you'll find is the idea of Saturnalia at this time of year around what we call December 17th is about light. You will find endless references to Saturn being Satan from the astro viewpoint. And so here we have the Luciferian idea of a festival of light. What would you say about that, Jason?
Well, that's it. And this is, again, where it gets all interesting with the whole illumination, light, Lucius, Lucifer, Satan, Saturn, like all these things are very intertwined. And as you said, we don't quite have the exact key to unravel it all, but it's all there in some way, shape, or form, it seems.
Yeah, it's almost like for my part, my studies have taken me so far afield across so many different kind of belief systems and even, totally unrelated places you could go to do research. What you find is when you look at things in this way, you'll find a key here and a key there. And if you stuck to any one line of research, you probably wouldn't come across it. But what you begin to understand is that it's all representing an older idea. The problem is understanding what the older idea originally was is the difficult thing to unravel here. And that's kind of why we're doing this episode, just to show people some of the roots of how we got to where we are, because so many people don't take time to think, why are we buying presents and having Christmas and doing all these things right now? Part of it's about the sun, but there's also a big part of it, which we're covering here, goes back into antiquity, whatever that might be, if there was a supposed Roman Empire. But we do have the mythology that supposedly comes from that time, and it too is encoding information about these ideas.
Right. Now, during the time of Saturnalia, peace was said to prevail and all wars were temporarily stopped and the courts were closed. Now, that sounds all good and positive. Government offices, schools, as well as some businesses would also be closed, very similar to today. But the festival would begin when Roman authorities chose an enemy of the Roman people to represent the Lord of Misrule. Each Roman community would select an individual whom they would force to indulge in food and other physical pleasures, a lot of which would be sexual in nature, throughout the week of the festival. At the conclusion of the festival, the Roman authorities believed they would be destroying the forces of darkness by sacrificing this person whom they had chosen to represent the forces of darkness. Like the majority of pagan festivals, Saturnalia had an astronomical correspondence, as we have been discussing, this one being when the sun reaches its furthest point from the earth and its renewed journey back. Saturnalia is considered a celebration of the sun's triumph over winter and the continuation of life, hence the birthday of the unconquerable sun. By modern reckoning, the winter solstice is usually on December 21st or thereabouts, but in ancient times, with the use of a different calendar system, as we have discussed quite often on this show, it fell on December 25th. The winter solstice is the shortest day of the year and the longest night. Saturnalia is a time to join family and friends, albeit with a serious sense of debauchery attached to it, to celebrate the gods, the sun, and the coming of spring and life renewed.
So we still have these same ideas, Jason, just kind of watered down, where maybe sex, drugs, and rock and roll, as it's being, interpreted here, doesn't come into it. We have a strong sense of materialism, and there is partying, right? And there is overeating, and there is over drinking, and these ideas of the Lord of Misrule come into it. It's hard to know if there truly was back in the day any true kind of human sacrifice done in the way they're describing it, but the idea of sacrifice itself is relatable directly to the sun in this time of year. And the idea behind it is that population of any given living thing is static. And if you want more of something, you have to kill off something living now to get more of this thing. It's a similar idea to going into a rainforest, burning down a few acres so that you can grow something else there. If you take that apart to its roots, it's a similar idea. And I can't tell you whether it's true that human sacrifice ever went on, but I can tell you to a certainty that in Christmas, we have carried these ideas forward in the form of ego and materialism in a big, big way.
In 312 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity despite being raised in the Sol Invicta cult, which had as its central figure the Sun King. So again, we see this whole sun symbolism revolving around and also intertwined with Saturn symbolism. This may have ended the persecution of Christians in the Roman Empire, but Christianity did not become the official religion within a day. The cult of Saturn was said to have clung on for quite some time, and Saturnalia was still celebrated for at least into the next century.
All right, so you can imagine, it's hard to know if these historical accounts hold any water in the literal sense, but you can imagine that if there were all these traditions in a time and some emperor stood up to the table and said, guess what, we're going to do it this way now, that you're not just going to erase the older traditions that everyone had been doing. And if you logically try to reason out if it's possible, almost certainly what would happen is you would begin to blend the older belief systems into the new way of doing things. And it seems a logical conclusion that maybe that's what happened, although it's very difficult to know because, as we all know, history is a lie agreed upon. So I guess the main question here for me still is, was there ever a guy named Constantine? I don't know this, but we do have the historical accounts. So it seems likely that at some point older traditions did in fact morph into what the church was doing at the time. And that's what we see here. It's just that most people are unaware that wrapped up in the traditions that we're still celebrating are the ideas of Saturn and are the ideas of the cycle of the sun, or basically in modern parlance, the acceptable year of our Lord, which is about the sun. Go ahead, Jason.
December 25th was assigned as the birth date of Jesus Christ by Pope Julius I in the year 350 AD. This brought clarity to a question that had divided Christian believers in different areas for many years and legitimized the practice of celebrating the Nativity. By the end of the 4th century, most Christian denominations had been recognizing December 25th as the birth date of Jesus, even though they really don't think it was in the winter.
Right. That's what I was going to mention. You can talk to any number of people who follow the Christian tradition, and many of them will have a different idea of when the supposed birth of Jesus is. But nonetheless, here we have the main church, the central church of the time, the Vatican, hooking it up to the 25th. And that's a telling thing. So it doesn't, in my view, it doesn't matter what the true date would be for this conversation. What matters is, what did the church do? Why did the church do these things? And I think it's exactly what we're pointing at here. There are these older ideas that needed to be maintained, so they just became encoded into the newer ideas that were being added on, in my view.
Right. And there's a lot of inferred ideas that if there was a physical person who was born to be Jesus, the person wouldn't have been born with the story as given in the wintertime because of the rains that occur in the Middle East, and they wouldn't have made sense with the rest of the story. That the Roman emperor wouldn't have commanded people to go traveling during this dangerous time. It wouldn't have happened. It didn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I've seen endless arguments, Jason. But the arguments to try to determine that are almost as tangled a web to unweave as what we're addressing here. A lot of people have said September for a lot of reasons, and then a lot of people have even said June. I've seen other accounts where they make the argument. To me, these are unimportant things. I mean, it's just a day. You know, if really the idea here is to grow spiritually, what day a thing occurred, well. I'm gonna end up going exactly against what I'm saying here, but the idea that the day is the important thing to me is really not. If you're on a spiritual quest, the idea is the spiritual ideas that come out of it. And although what I just said is going to fly absolutely in the face of the alchemical ideas, where it's where the sun is, that is directly tied to spiritual growth, but that's a whole other conversation.
Right. And even in the Christian Bible, I believe, I don't know if it's the literal words of Jesus or not, but celebrating his birth is not the idea, but following the paths that he set out is the important part.
Well, for me, that's always it. You know, even, you know, I've done a lot of studying of Buddhist ideas. And even in the kind of scriptural text that you can come across, there's supposed, you know, history of the Buddha saying, don't worship me, don't put up things for me, which actually ended up happening. He goes, I'm not the important thing here. Each of you is the important thing. Each of you now has a path to travel, a spiritual path. But you can see what happens with people. You know, we always end up making statues and altars and all these other things. And in the Buddhist tradition, supposedly the Buddha flat out said, don't do these things. Don't make shrines to me. Don't worship me. Don't try to make me a god. The spiritual thing is the important thing. So, I mean, it happens across all traditions where we get wrapped up in the details. And really, truly what it's about, supposedly, is spiritual growth, in my view, anyhow.
And I agree with that. It absolutely should be. By focusing on the individual, you're not really getting the bigger picture.
Right, and that plays directly into the time of year we're talking about that's so closely tied to Saturn, Jason. It's about materialism and ego, isn't it? And that's not good for a society. And so I would argue that as a spiritual marker in the year, it just isn't. It's doing the exact opposite of what a spiritual holiday should do. And it's even symbolized in the history we have from supposed Rome, where they're going to do 3 or 5 days, whatever it was, of lawlessness. But the idea was, we're going to get this out of our system, then we're going to do this supposed sacrifice, and it ends right there. Then we're back to the grindstone here. We don't have these ideas up in modern Christmas. You know, it ends and then, you know, it peters off to whatever. But the truth of it is we're all tied up in materialism and ego this time of year. And for my money, that is so far away from any spiritual endeavor as to be ludicrous on the face of it. But that's just my point of view.
Now, the other part of it that got integrated into modern Christmas would be Yule or Yuletide or Yule time. It was and still is today, actually, a festival observed by historical Germanic peoples. This festive time has been connected to the celebration of the wild hunt, the god Odin or Woden, and the pagan Anglo-Saxon Modronit. The event would last for 12 days, which is where the 12 days of Christmas notion comes from. It would later undergo a Christianized reformulation, which would result in the term Christmastide. Today, Yule is also used at times as a synonym for Christmas, as I'm sure many people are aware of. Current Christmas customs and traditions, such as the Yule log, Yule goat, Yule boar, Yule singing, and others, stem from this original pagan Yule. Today, the event is celebrated in heathenry and some other forms of modern paganism.
So you can see how the older ideas that were handed in supposed histories tie much more closely with the natural world. We're talking about the wild hunt here. Well, why? Well, it's simple, because when we came by September at the vernal or fall, or the autumnal or fall equinox, that was it, man. Harvest was over. By the time October is out, there are precious few things left that anyone's going to be harvesting, and that means one thing. That means you're going to kill animals in a lot of parts of this world to exist. And so that's really what's being, celebrated here, is that this is part of the year we have to do, but now we're killing things. That's what's being pointed out here. And not only that, as you come into the winter months, they're always an allegory for fire and ice as hell, a harder time. We can't wait till we get past the low point of the sun so the days will grow longer. We can get back to spring, because in spring, baby, that's living. You see, those are the ideas that are being held in all this. And it's really quite an a huge leap from where our holidays have come, because they're really not tied, most of them, to any natural ideas that truly matter in our lives. For most of us, we have a grocery store. We could give a damn if there's gonna, if anything's being hunted or harvested. We don't even think about it. But you see, when you get back to nature, there is a reason for these things historically, and they actually factually do correspond with a legitimate part of how people had to live. And that, in my view, is how they came to be important and why they're still echoed today. And that is all about the path of the sun, in my view. Jason.
Let's talk about another aspect of Christmas, which is Santa Claus. Nicholas, who was named a saint in the 19th century by the Roman Catholic Church, was a priest or a bishop or something along those lines who was present at the Council of Nicaea. There are various stories of miracles attributed to him, a large amount of which have to do with the giving of gifts. So he was also called Nicholas the Wonder Worker. A cult sprang up about him called the Cult of St. Nicholas, which started as early as the 4th century in the port of Myra, which is in the southwest of what is now considered the country of Turkey. This is actually where Nicholas died on December 6th, but the exact year is unknown. His mortal remains had been buried in a church outside the city walls and were brought to Bari in Italy in 1087, where they have been venerated ever since. The Nicholas cult spread north until it was adopted by German and Celtic pagans. These groups had their own mythological beings they worshipped, led by Odin or Woden, the chief god, and who was the father of Thor, Baldur, and Tyr. Odin was described with having a long white beard and rode a horse through the heavens one evening each autumn. When Nicholas merged with Woden, he shed his Mediterranean look, grew a beard, mounted a flying horse, and changed his flight plans to December, donning heavy winter clothing for the journey. Now, in a bid for pagan adherence in Northern Europe, the Catholic Church adopted the Nicholas cult and taught that he gave gifts, and they should as well, on December 25th instead of the original December 6th.
So there's so much tied up here, Jason, but I'll just suffice it to say this. Anyone can go look at the ideas in this country, in the United States, of Madison Avenue, where marketing was developed. And you can see how marketing was brought to bear on the idea of Santa Claus. There are a ton of people out there that will draw the parallel to the Luciferian ideas going on here, even, considering Saturn to Satan, which is the astrological ideas behind this time of year. And when the winter solstice sign falls in Capricorn, you have a guy dressed in red who's coming down into the place where you have fires. It's a secret. You lie to your children. Materialism is wrapped up into it because it's going to be all about gifts and these other things. But from the point of view for the average American person, I invite you, go look at what Madison Avenue had to do in terms of marketing with inventing what we accept as part of Christmas now. It's not only not that old when you break it down, but it seeks to kind of wipe away everything Jason just told you, where there are roots to these ideas, and they were adopted, and they were all pagan. All of them were pagan in their practice. And I would point out to anyone, so many people come and make comments that want to belittle the word pagan or someone who might be pagan. It just means someone who dwelled in the country. That's what pagan meant. So what you're looking at here are traditions from people who lived close to nature, and that's what this is about. So it's a bit narrow-minded to go at this in a different way. But I think it's critical that we take apart the things that we do in the modern age and try to understand why we do them or where they came from. Anyhow, Jason, I'll give it back to you to wrap up the first portion here.
Now, I could definitely say that social engineering is heavily involved with the materialism that became completely tied in with Christmas. And I think you would totally agree with that.
Absolutely. There is no getting away from it.
And the whole buying of the gifts for Christmas can be highly attributed to the Macy's department store in New York City starting in 1874. This store presented a $10,000 scene of imported dolls that started the lavish tradition of Christmas window displays and gave birth to the occupation of window dressing. New York City Christmas shopping eventually became a popular tradition as a result of this, becoming sanctioned by U.S. presidents and New York City socialites. The following year after Macy's first Christmas window display, the Christmas card was introduced from England and soon became a widely adopted part of U.S. Christmas tradition as well. This all led to the commercialism now associated with Christmas, the whole thing being much more a festival for businesses to make gobs of money as opposed to being any sort of family event or spiritual notion.
Right. So here's the social programming, as you state, Jason. And, this is Macy's. We're not far from Madison Avenue here, the marketing center. I would invite anyone to go look up what role Coca-Cola played in adopting the Santa Claus imagery and getting it out to the people. This was the way we celebrate Christmas in the United States is pretty much social engineering designed to do one thing, push materialism and make it big business. That's what it's about. And it's just a happy accident, not that the winter solstice falls in the sign of Capricorn, which represents materialism and ego. And these ideas go back to the oldest accounts, which Jason and I have just gone through, that we can find. So there is absolutely a tie to this time of the year for the ideas of material and ego, all the way back to the lawless time of Saturnalia in the supposed Roman Empire, all the way up to what we do now. It's all similar versions of the same thing, but it has nothing to do with spirituality. As a matter of fact, it has everything to do with going the opposite way of anything that would be much of a spiritual tradition, in my view. In my view, if you're going to spiritually grow, probably materialism and ego are the furthest most unhelpful things you could be engaged in if truly that's what you're about. But anyhow, Jason, what would you add?
Well, while we wish everyone a happy and healthy holiday time, we just want everyone to be aware, if in case they weren't, where all these things come from and what they mean, and very likely what they don't.
Right. And so what we're going to do in the second half of this is we're going to break down the ideas of the sun. And this ties directly to what the church later adopted as the acceptable year of the Lord. They outlined it with 12 saints representing the 12 months of the year, which were actually the sun playing a role or doing what the sun does in each acceptable month in a year of the Lord. So many of the holidays that we celebrate now have aspects of the sun hidden within them. And, we live in a new modern time, and it's time people took the time to recognize the natural system around us and to get back to some of the ideas that were hidden and obscured in so many of the holidays that we have. And Christmas is a great example. For my part, I get with my family, I spend time at Christmas time, or what we call Christmas time, but I don't get wrapped up in the materialism. That's not what it's about. We have a meal together, we share time together. For me, it's time to grow up out of the materialism and the egocentric ideas that have been brought here. And while there probably was a good reason for them back when people were eking out a living in a more nature-based world, there's really, in my view, there's no place for that now. We don't have to do it. There's no reason to do these things as far as I can see. Anyhow, Jason, anything you want to add before we click over and jump into the kind of solstice ideas?
Well, as with so much with social engineering, it all ties back to money and the businesses sucking out of us and profiting from us. And that's what I see this Christmas time as being now. It actually disgusts me. I love the concept of getting together and appreciating each other as family and friends, but what it has been turned into and what it is in 2017 is pretty foul. I'm not cool with it.
Yeah, how many times, Jason, this time of year has your reliable newscast come on and told you that this is either going to be a good Christmas season or a bad one because we can read the future? And the real trouble here is all these poor business owners are in the black right now. And for them to get in the red, this whole year of doing business is dependent on Christmas. That idea has been with us for most of my lifetime, and I'm not even kidding. And it goes to show what's going on here. There's more to life than money and buying and selling and materialism, so much more. And I would suggest that much of the social programming, much of the obscuring of what holidays' true meanings were when they were connected to some natural thing, it's truly about leading people away from any sort of a spiritual path that they could find. And as we jump into this next portion, which has directly to do with the path of the sun, the ideas that are held in alchemy, the solstices, the equinox, I'm going to try to demonstrate a little bit of these older ideas where spirituality was tied directly to the sun, where if the sun was growing in power, these were times when your spiritual growth could occur. And in much of what Jason just read, we basically covered the time when the sun is falling from the summer solstice all the way down to the winter solstice. And even in the outlines Jason gave you, the predominant idea here is that people are becoming forgetful and spiritual concerns are declining all the way down to the winter solstice. Anyhow, that brings us to the top of the first portion of episode 87.5, a special Christmas edition. Hope you'll join us all for the second part where we dig into the solstice. There There it is, man. Cheers. All right, man. Welcome to Crow 777 Radio Podcast. This is the second portion of episode 87.5, where we're just referencing a few things about this time of year, which are, in my view, very important. And I want to start by throwing a challenge out to the members here. As I have demonstrated, both the equinoxes and the solstices are misreported all the time. As an example, here where I am, the spring equinox was reported as occurring on March 20. Well, what I discovered when I put my mind to it was that truly when night and day were equal here, it was on the 24th, almost into the 25th. So there it is, almost a full business week forward of misreporting of the time. And as I began to think about this, it occurred to me, of course, why this is done. It's the same reason they put time zones in. Of course, there's a social engineering aspect that pulls you out of time to have things like time zones, but you can't just choose a day to report claiming that's a solstice or that's an equinox. You can't. And the example I always use is, does someone in Utah or Los Angeles see the sunrise at the same time as someone in New York? So what this points out to us, it is wholly dependent on where the observer is observing to
All right, let's talk the winter solstice here.
It's all you, man.
The winter solstice has been celebrated in cultures the world over for thousands of years, as we detailed in part 1. This start of the solar year is a celebration of light and the rebirth of the sun. In Old Europe, it was known as Yule, from the Norse Yule, J-U-L, meaning wheel, because they saw it as a giant wheel moving through the procession of time. It's all about the sun, though. The sun and Saturn gets all tied up together, as we've said so many times.
There's no getting away from it, and I chose to do this part in the second hour for members is because so many people with religious tradition think the information that we're going to cover here is an attack on them. And actually the exact opposite is true. They would find, if they took a closer look at things like the Bible, that this information that we're going to cover is encoded all the way through it. These older ideas have been encoded into your modern religious texts. It's just that a surface reading doesn't really get you there. You have to know more. You either have to have a teacher or the kind of ability to take it apart, dig in, and get to deeper levels of meaning. But in the first little bullet point here, they call it the start of the solar year. Well, of course it is. Of course it is the start to the solar year, because the sun has, at the winter solstice, which is currently marked at December 21st, which I think is probably, well, I know certainly is incorrect for a lot of people. The sun is going to get to its lowest point, then it's going to stand still for 3 days, then it's going to be said to rise, or the days will begin to lengthen up to the spring equinox when all rebirth begins to occur. Back to you, Jason.
Now, it's important to keep in mind that in astrotheology, Saturn can be also considered Satan, and these things are interchangeable. This is also why you get Saturn, Satan, Lucifer, Jesus, all being interchangeable at times, depending upon the point of view you want to look at. And this gets wrapped up even in the Freemasonry and all that, where they think Lucifer is the good guy. It can be very confusing, and honestly, I don't know if we have the exact answers as to what this stuff really means. But that being said, the rings we give during a wedding ritual represent the rings of Saturn. The word Saturday originates from the Old English word that means Saturn's Day. And to this day, many people continue to, without realizing it, celebrate Saturnalia through their participation in debauchery, gluttony, and goodness knows what else. And the one thing I've always been very, very, very curious about that I cannot find an answer to is how in the ancient world would people have known that Saturn had rings?
I've heard you talk about that before. Well, things must have been different, because I can tell you flat out, I don't know a human being whose vision's good enough to detect the rings of Saturn without an optical aid of some sort. So either things were vastly different in the past, or some Jesuit somewhere just simply wrote it down and said, this is history. These are hard things to know. But it is, in fact, demonstrable that when we put on a wedding ring, it is symbolic of the rings of Saturn. As Jason outlined before, this is the idea of Chronos. When people ask me about Saturn, I take a very simplistic view, and I say it's about time. And in the construct of time. It's what guarantees that we're going to die. So in some ways, the idea of Saturn is the idea of being in a prison. After all, it's going to ensure that you grow old and die. And there's no escaping that. But to get back to the debauchery and gluttony here, what's being pointed out is Christmas time, which is lockstep with Saturnalia and has its roots there. Anyhow, back to you, Jason.
Continuing on with Saturn symbolism, on the ceiling of St. Andrew's Church on Waterloo Street in East Sussex in England, there's a painting showing the sun surrounded by stars, a comet, a crescent moon, and Saturn. Keeping in mind, once again, what Saturn could represent with astrotheology. There's also the College Cathedral in Innenstadt, Cologne, Germany, clearly showing Saturn on their stained glass window.
So here we go. What I said in the opening is true. If you follow religious traditions of the West, then it's probably some form of Christianity. That's what we're talking about here. These are Christian or Catholic churches, and they took the time to encode into their inner sanctums pictures of the sun surrounded by stars and comets and crescent moons and Saturn. And to reiterate, so people can go look, the first of those that you can look up online is St. Andrew's Church on Waterloo Street in East Sussex. The second is the Cologne Cathedral in Innenstadt, Cologne, Germany. Go look them up. And these are not the only examples. There have been people out there who have shown so many altars in Christian churches are encoding the nebula of Orion. Well, the average person who thinks about the Western religious traditions, they would think that all this is so far from what they understand the religion to be. But I'm here to tell you, it's all encoded there. These older ideas are, in fact, encoded into almost every major religious tradition that matters. It's just that surface readings aren't going to get you there, which tells you something. Which tells you something huge. If you are a person who is truly involved in a religion and truly wants spiritual growth, well, then I've just informed you that there's more information than you can glean from a surface reading. What does that mean? It means there's probably very knowledgeable teachers out there in this world who could show the way to get to this information. But at the end of the day, I will cut to the chase. So much of it has to do with the path of the sun and our natural environment. Why, you might ask? It's simple. Because the path of the sun is tied directly to when we can plant, when we can harvest, when we have to kill animals, if we didn't have grocery stores, that is. And it is also tied innately to spiritual growth and the idea that when we come by the height of the sun's power in June, that people become forgetful, forgetting why they're here and what they're supposed to be doing. And in that portion of the year, going to a spiritual decline all the way down to this day, what we call Christmas, what could be called the summer or the winter solstice, where the sun again begins to rise towards rebirth in spring, at which point, once again, our spiritual abilities are reignited. Those are the ideas that are being encoded here. Back to you, Jason.
So in an esoteric sense, the sun cycle represents your soul's growth in consciousness, along with the illumination of your soul. And again, sun and Saturn imagery get interchanged with this light and illumination concept. Now, to envision this, imagine that spring is the birth of your soul. Once you have reached summer, your soul begins its descent from its original spiritual home into incarnating to this planet. As the days begin to get shorter, beginning on the summer solstice, the decrease in sunlight represents the veil of forgetfulness, where we do not remember why we came here or what our purpose may be. As the days become longer, beginning on the winter solstice, your soul is released from its physical presence and makes its ascension back to its spiritual home with the source.
These are critical ideas. And of course, this ties to the ideas that were encoded into alchemy. And I don't have another word to say than alchemy. And it's unfortunate because so much gets attached to the word alchemy. But what I'm saying in alchemy is basically just observation of our natural environment. That's what's being stated here. And not too long ago, I had reread some old Eastern texts that had to do with meditation and the idea of karma. And it struck me for this reason. It's stated over and over in this particular text, and actually in the Dhammapada, it says things to this effect, if I remember correctly, that it is very easy to do the wrong thing. but it is very difficult to do the higher-minded right things. And actually, when we take that to the natural environment we live in, let's take apart what Jason just read. So when we reach roughly June 21st, the sun is at its height, and then the next day it begins to descend and days grow shorter. So from June all the way down to where we are now in December, roughly December 21st, the nights have gotten longer, the days have gotten shorter. Now, as it begins up towards spring, the days are going to lengthen. But let me tell you something, it's going to be cold and miserable for a lot of people all the way up through March. So really, for some people, the only really easy part of the year would be when it finally warms up in spring all the way over to the fall equinox. The point I'm making here is our world reflects a lot of what's being said in these traditions. How, you want to know something? If you want to do the wrong thing, it's easy. You can do it without thinking about it. But if you want to do the right thing, if you want spiritual ascension, if you want to become a higher human being, you're going to have to work at it, because it's not that dang easy. Anyhow, that's kind of the ideas that I see wrapped up in this, Jason.
I totally agree with all that. That makes so much sense. And you just keep your awareness up about these things so that you are not slipping on a negative path and staying on your positive spiritual growth path.
Right. And I included this next bullet point, Jason, to just show that they're really, even in smaller spiritual traditions that we don't hear much about, they're all echoing the same natural environment ideas. So go ahead.
Of the 4 sacred directions and cardinal colors, winter is represented by the north and the color blue, which in Cherokee literally means cold.
So there we've jumped from all these European religions over to Christian traditions of the West, back to the Norse ideas that were the root of so much of this, the Roman ideas that were the root of so much of this. And here we have the supposed Cherokees in a much lesser known tradition having the very same ideas, even encoded to directions of the compass and colors that have encoded meanings, associating the ideas of what? Our natural world, nothing more, our natural world. Back to you, Jason.
The 4 seasons teach us a lot about the process of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Keep in mind that alchemy provides the saying, as above, so below. After the sperm fertilizes the egg, we go through a maturation process that is identical to the exact number of days of both the maturation of corn from a seed, along with the gestation period for a woman to give birth to a child.
Now, this is a critically important idea. The average person may think, well, why do I need to care about the natural environment? I have everything I need. I have a grocery store. I have a bank account. I have all these things that will get me through a modern day, which is true as long as these things function properly. But in this bullet point, you're being shown exactly why the physical processes of bringing a new life from the point of view of a human woman match exactly the maturation of a seed of corn all the way up through the gestation period. How can that be? You see, the ancient people observed these things, and you'll even hear tales from certain types of Indians saying, when they're asked, where did you come from? And then they'll tell you, we came from corn, or we came from the corn people. Well, what's encoded in that? This is encoded in that. How can it be that we have living human beings in this world that just by chance our gestation period matches a corn seed? How can that be? Well, has something to do with the physical environment, doesn't it? The physical environment is going to dictate certain things about how we live, what happens when we give birth, our spiritual development, all these ideas. And that is what's wrapped up in this idea. And I would invite anyone to kind of meditate on this idea. How can it be that the gestation period of a human woman and a seed of corn match verbatim? Think about it. Anyhow, back to you, Jason.
Now, more symbolism here. The child travels down the birth canal, the tunnel, as the child is brought from darkness to birth or into the light. We follow the same process as allegory to the sun in its apparent power or lack of power throughout the traveling of the seasons.
And there it is, man. So let's lock this right to what we see in the path of the sun, or the acceptable year of our Lord, or the alchemical idea of the seasons, or any way you want to describe it. There was probably a time, if we have an antiquity that actually existed, where almost all living things, mammals, got pregnant near the vernal equinox in March. And if you think about what Jason just read, so that pregnancy happens, it starts to really get underway at the height of the power of the sun. I'm sorry, I'm saying this wrong. Almost all pregnancies were going to happen at the height of the power of the sun in June. Sorry, I said that totally wrong. Let me correct myself here. So then there's like this fall, which is the idea of the child coming down the birth canal headed for the light. It comes by the winter solstice at the bottom. The pregnancy is following this, and then up towards March, where rebirth will occur, or the birth of the child, which was conceived at the height of the power of the sun. I know I didn't describe that very well, Jason, but I did the best I could. I've read so many versions of this; it's hard to keep it all straight. Anyhow, I'm not going to try to I'm not going to try to kick that any harder. I did what I could.
And the last point here in this first section, let's do the winter solstice falls to the sign of Capricorn, symbolized by the knees, which represents materialism and ego, both of which are very bad for growth of the soul. Christmas, especially the modern Christmas, it's a time for materialism and pretty much seems nothing else, does it?
Right. So you can see how the modern idea of Christmas is still echoing what this time of year is said to be about. If we can go back to the oldest accounts we can find and then cross-reference it with the astrological ideas and all the things we can get our hands on, what we find is when the sun is at its low point, what we find it represents is materialism and ego. And that's what Christmas is in spades. But Jason, let's jump in a little bit and directly address the sun. But, I guess before we move forward, I should point out the reason I keep saying that Capricorn symbolizes the knees. Not only is it in our historical events and holidays that all this stuff is encoded and hidden, so the average person is celebrating something they don't even know the root of or the reason of, or the fact that it all ties to our natural environment, it's in our culture too. And I did take the time not too long ago to break down the song by supposed Robert Johnson, who in my view is nothing more than a made-up personage, to take apart the song The Crossroads, where he falls down to his knees, pointing out again that even in modern culture, the crossroads is in fact the path of the sun, but it's also a place where a decision must be made. But in this case, the idea of hell is again the winter solstice, or the low point of the sun, using the fire and ice idea. And the reason Robert Johnson falls down to his knees is because the sun is in the sign of Capricorn, which is the knees, you see. Anyhow, Jason, let's keep moving.
So the winter solstice is the low point of the sun, marked on 12/21, which encodes 33.
So here are the thumbprints of the helpful organizations, corporations, religious institutions who have hidden all the things we could know about our spiritual connection to our natural environment, in my view. It is no coincidence that every year you are told the winter solstice is on 12/21, which in fact encodes the number 33, which is always a thumbprint, isn't it? But that's not a true thing. Everyone in the world has a different observation point to view the sun. It is not possible that everyone in the world is experiencing the low point of the sun on the 21st of December. And for that matter, someone in Australia, wouldn't even be close. But anyhow, to keep moving, Jason.
The low point or weakest point of the sun is an allegory for hell, the fire and ice concept.
Okay, I've said this many times, and I include it again to get people to think about what is going on here in terms of our natural environment. I've said so many times that if you learn something from your natural environment, there's no lie in it. If you were to observe a tree for a year straight and that tree taught you things about this world, there would be no lie in what you learned, because it is the natural environment. Even if this natural world is not natural in the way we think it is, which I suspect is probably true. It's probably not natural in the way we think it is, but it doesn't matter. From our point of view, it appears to be a perfect system. So again, to get this idea of how we started to push hell into music, where rock and roll, they're throwing the devil's horns, it's all tied to the sun. It's all this allegory of fire and ice when the sun is going down to its low point into hell. Anyhow, Jason.
Now, equinoxes and solstices are always said to be on certain days, which is actually not true as reported by the mainstream. The correct day and time would depend on where the observer is in the world, in the same way that the sunrise is not the same in New York or Los Angeles at the same time. Things could be hours, almost a day apart, really.
I've reiterated this a few times in this episode, but this is part of how culture is homogenized to misunderstand the value of a natural environment. After all, with a time zone, you're convinced that people are nearly 1,000 miles away, look at their wristwatch, and it's the same time for both of them. Well, that's not a true thing. Those two people are going to experience sunrise and sunset at different times in the same way that equinoxes and solstices will be experienced at different times. But the critical thing here is when we talk about equinoxes and solstices, it is the only true calendar division of our year. Everything else is artificial. Everything else is man-made. And unfortunately, deception is built into a lot of that. In the same way time zones pull us out of nature, the idea of how our calendar has been presented to us does too. So it is critically important for people to begin to understand truly when an equinox occurs for them and truly when a solstice occurs for them. And again, I'll echo the challenge here. Anyone out there listening that wants to try to figure these things out for where they are over a year will have learned something critically important. And I hope if they do, they will share it here. Anyhow, Jason.
The concept of hell also plays into how people used to live. In the fall, no more plants could be grown. You'd have your harvest time, for many which meant killing things to eat by the winter time.
Right. And so I'm echoing the same idea over here. There's actually a moon in September, or maybe it's October, called the Hunter's Moon. In the old natural ways of reckoning time, these ideas were already labeled on things. So people living in this natural world were not confused. We are confused. And there's almost no one listening to this that thought, oh man, we're by September now. I better load the shotgun so I can go out and kill things to eat. But that is the root of this natural system. And I'm not suggesting that people should go kill things to eat. I understand a lot of people are vegan. That's a great thing. It's a higher minded thing. But the point is, there is a reason for this encoded information that's been lost. Anyhow, Jason.
The winter solstice is said to be the gateway of the gods, while the summer counterpart is said to be the gateway of men.
I wanted to include this because it can be found in so many of the oldest texts I've read. And while I have not got to the bottom of exactly why this is being put out in the way it is, I think it's critical that people understand this idea. There are many old writings, and unfortunately I can't cite any of them right now. I should have written them down, where the winter solstice is considered the gateway for the gods. In other words, if I think what they're getting at is if a death occurred at the winter solstice, then the recently dead would be traveling through the gateway of the gods. And the inverse of that, when the sun is at the height of its power, the gateway of men, being the summer solstice. I want to put that out just for general knowledge.
In the globe model, the winter solstice is the sun at its lowest point. But if this model is indeed not correct, as we postulate here a lot, it is just allegory, as the sun is at its weakest, but high and low, or this idea has no place in reality.
I wanted to put this in because what you're going to hear is after the sun passes its strongest point in June, it's said to be falling. This is completely dependent on a globe model, on the NASA spinning orbital model, but it doesn't matter. And I want to get that out there. Everyone can still talk about it regardless of what you think is correct, because all the cultural ideas of falling into hell or the fall of mankind, or for the same reason that all new TV programming is brought to you in fall, and most of the terrorist nonsense, it's because of this idea. And I'll tie it back to a thing we covered a bit earlier. The idea from a spiritual standpoint is once you pass the power of the sun in June, is that spiritually, the potential in all living human beings is beginning to subside for a while. We're becoming forgetful. We're forgetting why we're here, what we're supposed to be doing. Our spiritual endeavors are being lessened. That is all wrapped up in what was just said here. And we can't get away from it. We can't get away from this terminology of the fall, but we don't need to. Even if people out there listening are convinced the earth is flat, you should still use this language and think about it in this way because of the way it's been encoded into culture, from my point of view anyhow. Jason.
The word solstice is derived from the meaning to stand still. At the winter solstice, the sun stands still for 3 days before rising again towards spring, which is an allegory for the biblical 3 days of Jesus before rising. So again, this astrologically speaking is in the sky this way. So why did Christians drag that into the spring? Because they want to symbolize a rebirth, even though that's not actually technically what happens.
Well, in some ways, I guess I can't answer that all the way, but again, I would point to that all the big religious texts that have stood the test of time are encoding these ideas. And I wanted to include this bullet point, not necessarily to point out the biblical allegory. I think that's less important than what I'm about to point out here. For those people who would truly understand a true division of this year in our natural system, you've got to determine when the solstice occurs. One of the things about the winter solstice, which is mentioned here, is it is claimed, and I have not observed this, I have partially observed this, is that at the winter solstice, the sun stands still for 3 days and then begins what's called its ascent towards spring. But what it basically means is then the nights will start to get a little shorter and the days will get a little longer. This will be key for anyone out there who truly wants to begin to outline what a true division of a year is and truly what a year might be. And I'm as ignorant as everyone listening here. I suspect it's incorrect, but until people do what I'm suggesting here, we won't know for certain, will we?
No, we won't. Now, there's a last part you want to get to here, and that is the year 2018, the one about to come up, encodes both 666 as well as 9/11.
Okay, I wanted to get this on the record. I suspect, and when you make assumptions, you risk of making an ass of you and me. That's what I'm doing here. I'm risking making an ass of you and me, but I suspect that 2018 is going to be one hell of a transformative year. In all the research I've done, I have noticed that very few times when a fabricated calendrical date that resolves to 9/11 never goes to waste. This calendrical year date that we're coming into, which is made up out of whole cloth, by the way, is 2018. 18 encodes the 666 idea, but when you take it apart in the typical standard numerological way, it encodes 9/11. But this is not why I'm making the prediction wholly. I have seen so many echoings and things in media and commercials and TV and magazines and all the things I occasionally glance at when I'm allowing my mind to be polluted that have demonstrated to me to the point where I will now make the prediction. I suspect that 2018 is going to be a hell of a ride and hugely transformative, maybe in some ways as 9/11 was back in the day. As I've stated so often, so many of the false flag things that have happened recently all encode themselves back to 9/11. Matter of fact, very few things that have happened recently don't. But anyhow, Jason, anything you want to add before we wrap up here and I let you get back to celebrating with your family?
You know, just as an afterthought from all the things we discussed today, I wonder if the notion that ancient peoples knew that Saturn had rings, as we know from wedding rings, earrings, all that sort of thing, maybe that's just another, not smoking gun proof, but something to put a notch in the belt towards history being skewed in some way.
Oh, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. But, you know, these are hard things to prove out. I've gone at them and I try to set a benchmark for myself that when I realize I'm spinning my wheels, I just stop. And I try to boil everything down as simplistically as I can. In my view, the rings almost symbolize the cage that we're in. There is no beginning. There is no end. The idea of Saturn being time. But what you're pointing out, Jason, isn't truly a conundrum. And I think it does, in fact, point to a false historical timeline. But the problem is I don't know how we would ever prove that out. So from my point of view, simply taking the idea of what Saturn means and boiling it down to the idea of chronos or time, I think becomes more helpful for the average person to think about. Anyhow, anything you want to add before we close up the second portion here?
Well, we thought we would give everyone a little gift out there for the holidays, and that's what this episode was about. But as always, we always try to give you the gift of truth and information.
Right. So I guess that's enough for now. Everyone's got some visiting with their family to do. So I will bring episode 87.5 to a close. And I want to wish you all a higher-minded, happy, and healthy coming 2018. And for today, I guess I can say Merry Christmas, Happy Solstice, or whatever Saturnalia's moniker would be. There it is, man. Cheers.